it's just a mess in the governor's mansion in Virginia. So the number 2 guy in the administration, the Republican administration in Virginia, he's running to fill those shoes, Ken Cuccinelli, and he's having a little bit of a problem. The press went to him today and said, you've gotten gifts from the same guy, haven't you? And he's like, yeah, I have. It's $18,000 worth, actually. And actually, the press knew that. I mean, so it's in his disclosure forms. So they said, you going to give it back? And he said, no, I'm not. They're the kind of things you can't give back. So this is interesting. Hunter over at the Daily Kos says, is Cuccinelli talking about sex? This is Ken Cuccinelli we're talking about, so probably not. Oh, wait, he's not. Among the gifts from Williams listed in Cuccinelli's financial disclosure statement is a $1,500 catered Thanksgiving dinner, private jet trips, and vacation lodgings. Cuccinelli says, there's some bells you just can't unring. Well, you could get back the $15,000 or the $18,000. But no. He's invoking what's called the spilt milk defense. As Hunter points out at Daily Kos, it's like saying, well, I'm sorry, Judge. I shot that guy, but he's dead now. We can't undo that, so let's just move on. Right. Speaking of dead and speaking of Virginia, Virginia's suicide rate is now the highest it's been in 13 years. Virginians are now 3 times more likely to die from suicide than they are from homicide. And Virginia is not alone. Over the past 10 years, our nation, actually for much longer than that, but it's really been going up fast since Mr. Bush was president, our nation's suicide rate has been steadily climbing. It's risen a staggering 23% since 2003. According to the CDC, 700,000 emergency room visits just in 2010, the last year for which we have statistics, just for attempted suicides. The fact is, America's suicide rate is on the rise, and conservative economic policies are to blame. And Cuccinelli, of course, wants to perpetuate that in the state of Virginia, where they have one of the worst suicide rates in the country. A brand new study was released in May. Professors David Stuckler and Sanjay Basu of Oxford University in England found that suicide rates both in the United States and the United Kingdom increase when working class wages and wealth decline. The study calculates, for example, that there were 4,750 excess, their word, suicides during the recession period in the United States, this last recession, compared with suicide rates before the recession. Stuckler and Basu conclude their report by saying, quote, this is from a very good scientific study, quote, what we have learned is that the real danger to public health is not recession per se, but austerity. End of quote. That's right. The very same austerity policies that Republicans in Washington are constantly pushing on us, these are the same policies that are driving Americans to kill themselves. Economic disaster equals despair. Despair very often leads to suicides. And these findings are nothing new. Down under in Australia, they did research that definitely, this is a 100-year study, definitely positively shows that suicides increase under conservative governments. Australian scientists found that suicides in that country increased markedly when a conservative government was in power, and they found similar results for the UK. These Australian scientists looked at suicide stats for New South Wales. It's one of what we would call a state of Australia, the one that includes Sydney. Between 1901 and when the Australian federal government was established, and 1998, from the beginning of Australia until 98. This was a study that was published in 2003. I've talked about it before here. They then looked at which political parties had control in both state and federal governments in New South Wales, which have consistently been either under Labour Party control, that's like the Democratic Party here in the U.S., or Conservative Party control, that's like the Republican Party here. And surprise, surprise, the scientists found that the highest rates of suicide happened when the conservative state and federal governments were in power. And then here's another smoking gun. When conservative-backed austerity policies began to ravage Greece in 2010, suicide rate went up by 18%. In Athens, the suicide rate soared 25%. Before austerity came to Greece, that nation had the lowest suicide rate in the entire European Union. In other European nations hit with austerity, the results are the same. In Italy, for example, the suicide rate has also increased thanks to devastating austerity policies. So if conservative-backed austerity policies are driving suicides right now, right here in Virginia and in the United States and all around the world, and we've known about this for over a decade, we've seen the science, it's in. Why is anybody still listening to Reaganomics? Why is anybody paying attention to Republicans and conservatives? And what can we do to reverse this trend? You go back to the study that Stuckler and Basu did. They found that to stop the epidemic of austerity-driven suicides, what should we do? Invest more in our economy and country. They actually went back and looked at how FDR's investments worked out with regard to suicide. And they found that during the Great Depression, every $100 of per capita, per person, of relief spending from FDR's New Deal, that'd be about $1,800 in today's dollars, that's per person, led to a decline in pneumonia deaths of 18 per 100,000 people, a reduction in infant deaths of 18 per 1,000 live births, and a drop in suicides of 4 per 100,000 people. They also highlight the case of Iceland. In 2008, Iceland experienced arguably the worst banking crisis in history relative to the size of a nation's economy. All 3 of its major banks failed. Its debt soared, its unemployment rate skyrocketed, the nation's currency completely collapsed. And despite all that, rather than taking the conservative approach that we took here in the United States, bailing out banks, slashing funding to government programs, cutting social services, Iceland decided to say no to austerity and rejected cuts to its social safety net and rejected bailing out their banksters. And as a result, there was no significant increase in suicides during Iceland's economic collapse. You'd think people would pick this up. You know, you would think that this clear correlation between austerity and suicide rates in Europe and the United States would wake up Republicans and encourage them to stop inflicting the same despicable and devastating policies on Americans. But in their continuing service to the billionaires, Republicans continue to slash away at social safety net programs and continue pushing the very Reaganomics policies that have devastated America's working class. Remember, when Republicans talk about how bad the economy is, they are bragging. Conservative economic policies, from austerity to the sequester to Reaganomics, kill people. And now that the science is in and is irrefutable, it's time to wake Americans up to this deadly con game.